how are you going to run this one? Are you going to go one
We
at a
are
time?
all getting at the stage.
All yours.
Yeah. So cool. Oh, the clicker. So my name is Nicolaj. This is Alexander. This is John. We will, in 45 minutes, basically try to answer a big question: how to get your startup or funding for your startup. And we'll do it by I giving a brief introduction. We have Alexander giving an introduction on how an investor like Pre-Seed is in it, and then John will tell the story of how their startup got funding. So I think the first thing to realize is that when we talk about funding, that's actually very, very different compared to which startup you are. It can be $10,000 from one startup and $10 million from another. So the first thing I think you have to have in mind when you are asking for money is to ask the right persons. So if this is a very simplified road of a startup from I have an idea to I'm a big, big company, highly profitable, I think the biggest mistake startups are doing is that they're actually targeting the wrong persons or the wrong institutions. For instance, targeting a bank. Sorry to say, but banks shouldn't give money out to high-risk startups. That's not the business model of a bank. Bank get an interest, or you could say a margin on the interest rate. So they should take low risk. And many are going to VCs and think, oh my God, VCs are giving out money to high risk. Yes, they are. But VCs are actually relatively late. VCs rather invest 5 million euro than 500,000 kroner. So what do? I think if you're early stage, you should forget about those and think who are really investing in early stage startups. That's basically yourself, called bootstrapping. It's your friends and family. It's public support programs like Pre-Seed. It's business angels and accelerators. So long story short, make sure you understand where you are. Are you early stage? Are you late stage? Don't spend your time go down to a bank. But then how do you convince people to invest in a company? Again, here's a big difference being late stage and early stage. Imagine I'm a highly successful startup in Denmark. I don't know, what could that be? Could it be something like Trustpilot or Tradeshift? You can't even call them a startup anymore. But imagine they are going out and raising more money. They have a lot of data. If you ask them, what's the acquisition cost of a customer? They know. They know the churn of customers. They know all these metrics. So in other words, of course you have to trust the management team to invest, but you have all the data, right? You have all the data about your customers, your competitors, the market size, all that. Then you can take an early stage startup like some of them I invested in. We have a dream about building a product. We have a dream about the market will be big, but honestly, we have no clue. So how to convince early stage investors? I have to say it's all about the management team. So before you go out and are asking people like Alexander for money, you should ask yourself, how do I get a team that is convincing enough for that? And you'll be surprised how big a portion that is. You know, where people are investors like me are basically saying, well, the business idea is so-so, but oh my God, that's the best data scientist I ever met, and that's the best salesperson I never met, I will invest. Honestly, that's how it is. And then when you look at some of these really, really successful startups, which are not really startup anymore, which is basically a grown-up company, I think Trustpilot is a good example. I guess you all know Trustpilot, you know, and Trustpilot is best known here, you know, when they're raising 700 million kroner from all these VCs. And that gives many startups that impression, oh my God, I have to go to these VCs for money. Yes, you should do it 8 years after inception. Sorry for the small font size, but, you know, who are the first investors in most startups? That are family members. And who was the first investor in Trustpilot? That was Peter's uncle, who invested 17,000 euro. And who were the next? That was actually, you know, the seed capital and pre-seed ventures together with some business angels. So again, the story is here that if you're early stage startup, it's about trust trust in you, and of course you should have some idea about that the market you're in or will become big and interesting, and people will pay for your products. But honestly, a big proportion of convincing investors is about having the right people. Okay, so now you're in a situation where you sort of realize that I'm early stage and I might be looking for a business angel. The problem is that you could end up buying access to a directory of 10,000 business angels in Europe. I know these exist. And then you start spamming out to all these 10,000 people and saying, I have this fantastic business idea. And you'll most likely be wasting your time and money. Because what really matters for business angels, and you can actually say most early stage investors, is two criteria. The first one is, do the business angel know you? Because now we're back to trust, an early stage trust. And if the person knows you, there's a much higher chance that that person will actually invest in you. And ideally, you want a business name that both knows you and knows the industry. Because that's also about trust. If I don't know the industry quite well, then I have to trust you a lot. Where if I know the industry not so well, or which I know the industry very well, then I can actually come with some good questions to you. So ideally, someone who knows both you and the industry, alternatively something that knows both sort of. Avoid sending random emails out to angels or early stage investors who you've never met and have no clue about your industry. And finally, if it works, doesn't work, clicker, there it works. It takes time to build that kind of trust. So many see these TV shows, which is good entertainment, saying, hey, come here and give a lot of money. I actually copied this slide from Mark Soster, the American VC, who says, I don't invest in a dot, I invest in a line. He, like most of us, wants to build relations with people because relations is about trust. I don't trust you after 5 minutes. I trust you after I met you 5 times over 3 weeks. So don't think that you can get the money after 5 minutes. And many of you will then, despite my advice, go to VCs early on and say, dear VCs, invest in my startup. And how many companies are getting VC funding in Denmark a year, you think? 10? 15? And why is that? Is that because there's no VC money out there? No, they have their pockets full of money. It's because it's actually not that many cases that satisfy for a real VC investment. Because it has to be a huge market, scalable, and you have to be so much differentiated versus competition. You might be there in 2 years, but that is when you have a lot of traction and a lot of data. So remember, early stage investment is about trust. It's about trust in you as a person. And your most likely investors are not VCs. It's most likely your friends and family, business angels, and public support programs. Okay? So after this brief introduction, we have Alexander from Pre-Seed, who will give an introduction on how it actually looked from their point of view.
Super. Can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you, Nicolaj. Great introduction. My name is Alexander. Just a quick warning, I spent the whole weekend at a meditation/yoga retreat, so I'm very sinful and I'm very at peace. So as I start using weird words like bliss and meditation and stuff, please just bear with me for a while, right? It's a quite an abrupt morning to wake up to 5,000 people and on stage talking. So I hope it goes all right. Cool. So my name is Alexander. I work for Pre-Seed Ventures as an investment manager. So my job is to find early stage companies, interesting companies, and invest in them. And afterwards, we work with our portfolio companies to make them grow as fast as possible and the best way as possible. Before we dive into, Before, so today I was going to talk a bit about what we, as an investor, look for in an early stage company when doing an investment, and then afterwards a bit about the approach from you looking for funding, you get funding, and some do's and don'ts, some tips in that process. Before diving into it, though, I would like to briefly explain to you who Pre-Seed Ventures are. We are an early stage investor. We do tickets from all the way down to 500,000 Danish kroner, and all the way our typical ticket is around 3 million Danish kroner. So it's at the pre-seed stage. We've been around for over 15 years doing the same stuff, so we know what we're doing. And we invest in what we call scalable companies with huge potential. More specifically within the tech and software industry, also some hardware, some medtech, and a bit of moonshots, so the crazy projects. These are some of the companies that we've been invested in along the way. You might know some of them, but yeah, we've done some good bets once in a while. All right, cool. Nicolaj also briefly wanted me to explain where we fit into the ecosystem, because we are not really a VC, but we're an early stage venture fund or investor. So we go in, right after the angels come in, or together with some angels, and then our main purpose is to kind of deliver the startup to a Series A funding. So we're in that sweet spot in between, and we're usually the first institutional investor in. But yeah, there might be some angels or before or together with us. From a company perspective, it looks a little bit like you have an MVP in the market, you have the first couple of customers, you have a little bit of data on how these customers are using your product. Your team is maybe 2-3 co-founders, and maybe the first 1 employee. All right, cool. Diving into it, right? So all investors kind of look for the same stuff. It's here divided into 5 categories. You could find other categories, but I'm going to stick with this one. And it's all about the team, as Nicolaj also covered. It's about the market that you're addressing with your product. It's about the product and the value prop it delivers. And it's about the scalability of the business model that you build around your company. And lastly, it's about the sustainable edge long term. So I'm going to go into these one by one. And I'm going to wait with the team because it's by far the most important, as Nicolaj was also talking about. Cool. So what do we look for when we say we look for a big market or a VC market? I was trying to explain it by an example. So we once did an investment in an ebook company back in the days. And this was kind of like the rationale behind that investment at that point, right? So the book market in Denmark and in Europe is fairly large, or pretty big. Back then, the ebook penetration was very low. But other places, like in the US, you had seen that the ebook trends were kind of taking off, right? And in Denmark, the competition was very scarce, and the same in rest of Europe. So that could lead to the conclusion that there could be, a potential for a big company within the ebook space in Northern Europe or Europe in general, right? And hence more feeble. So what we are looking for is a market that's huge or will be huge in 10 years, because it's easier to build a big company, which we are aiming for, in a big market or growing market. We then look for mega trends and timing. So is everything pointing towards that your solution should be the winning solution in the coming years? And in the end, we always look at the competition landscape, right? So are there big corporates doing the same? Are there other startups entering the market? How well funded are they? And all these kind of things. Cool. So moving on, product and value prop. It's going to be a lot of 3s, right? It's also 3 points on the last one. It's also going to be 3 points on this one. We look for superior products, which is easy to say, but what does it mean? We have a rule of thumb, which means it's 10x something, right? So 10x cheaper or smaller, bigger, faster, more efficient. The idea is that an incremental change is not going to be enough to be a category winner on the long run. So we need something that is a superior product. Then we'll look for user love to your MVP or the product that you're building. There are many ways to show this. Cohorts and user analysis and all these are some. But could also be users that share your product with their peers, or even maybe some word of mouth, or brand ambassadors and all these kind of things. And in the end, we look for traction. We are an early stage investor, so we when we come in, we don't always see, or you don't always have traction. So don't despair. We also invest before it actually starts to take off. That's our role. All right, that was product and value prop. Moving on, scalability. So it's all about the business model, right? So if you want to build a really big company within 10 years, it has to be scalable. So it has to be able to turn up the tempo pretty quickly. So these are 3 things that we look for within the business model. So organic growth is awesome if you have it. It's typical for communities and similar. So now here it's Tonsa, it's one of our investments. It's a football community where the one football player shares your product, the product with all his teammates. And then you got organic growth. It's a very easy way of growing because as soon as you get one user, you have multiple users. Then we look at the sales model. So can you repeat the sales that you already done? So do you actually understand the model and can you turn it up? So can I scale it up and do it faster and at a big scale? So do you understand the steps, the funnel? Do you understand the customer journey and can it be turned up? And then in the end, we also look for customer acquisition cost and lifetime value and a lot of other numbers around the customers. And it's all because we want to see that there's money behind actually scaling up. We have another rule of thumb that says you should, of course, make money on each sale, hopefully, but also that your customer acquisition cost your lifetime value should be 3 times your customer acquisition cost. So we have all these different metrics that we look for, right? Scalability. Cool. Moving on. Sustainable edge. So when your company becomes very big and it's successful, why are they not just going to be a big corporate, copying your play with a lot of more money than you have? And we look for these sustainable edges. So for the long term, how you're going to defend your successful business. A typical one within the software industry is network effects. So for example, within data, if your product becomes better, the more data you have, then the more customers you have, the better product, and it will be easier to win the next customers. So it's kind of like the snowball effect rolling, where you, in the end, when you're very successful, have a lot of customers, it's gonna be difficult to compete with you. Then there are also more classic ones like IP, branding, economics of scale, and similar. Does it make sense? I'm talking too fast or anything? No? All good, cool. Then the team. So yeah, it's the most important one, but also the most difficult one to explain what we actually look for. Nicolaj was covering it a bit, but we have a saying in our place that we would rather invest in a B idea with an A team than a A idea with a B team. It's also what Nicolaj was going at. And when we meet a new team, we look for kind of this purpose and big vision. So do they actually want to make a dent in the world? Make it all the way to the Trustpilot stage, right? Then we really want to see, hopefully we see complementary skills. So 3 business people from CBS is not going to build a great product. You need different roles, right? So we like to see somebody, that can actually build stuff with some technical background, and then somebody that can actually maybe sell the product, and maybe somebody with a bit of strategy experience and know-how from the industry. So these complementary skills. And then get shit done, yeah. No, it's all about you have to move something from A to B in different ways than have been done before. So it's can you actually execute and get from A to B? It's not normally always the easiest thing to do. So execution, find new ways, be innovative in the way that you build your business. Cool. That was kind of like the main 5 categories that we look at. I'm now going to jump briefly into... good time.
3 minutes.
into the process and some do's and don'ts in the process, right? All right, so this is just me putting up some steps. There could be other steps, and you could divide it up to different categories. This is just to have something to talk from. So let's say you start over here. So you have a company, and you think that you should have investors in to scale your growth. And then over here, you actually secure the funding, right, for your startup, and you get on to building a cool startup. So first of all, I would recommend you to start out by actually getting to know the investors and the VC model. So there are multiple books and blogs and videos about this. So to get to understand how they make money, how they therefore evaluate your company, how they will push you going forward, what their aim is, right? So understand the player that you're working with before actually starting. And then seriously ask yourself if a VC or an investor like Nicolaj and us are the right path for you, or organic growth might be a better path for your business. Cool. Moving on, Nicolaj touched briefly upon this. So shortlist your targets, right? I once in a while get emails like this. Mining company in China seeking investment. We can only invest in Denmark, and we do not do mining operations. So yeah, shortlist your target. Nicolaj was also covering this. Sorry for the repeat. But all investors do not invest in everything. So they have different sectors that they look at. They have geographies they look at. They have especially also stages, right? So we are pre-seed seed stage fund. There are Series A funds. There are growth funds. There are different funds for different parts of your journey. So make sure to target the right investor. Also, different investors have different investment theses. Some really like software as a service products. Some really like communities and B2C cases, and some really like the hard deep tech and all this. So make sure that you find the relevant investors. Cool. Then when you found investors, of course you want to present them with something, so you should create your material. This, of course, mainly being a pitch deck, but also kind of like a financial model behind what you're aiming for. I'm not going to go in depth with pitch decks because there's a lot of material online, so look into that. But what I will say though is that remember, the pitch deck is not to tell everything about your business. It's mostly to get us and other investors interested in your company, so you can actually get to meet us and then build a relationship from there. So it shouldn't be too long, but also not too shallow. And then remember, it's a narrative, right? So you want to tell a good story. You want to say the world was this way before, and then we came in, and now the world is this way, and it's much more awesome, right? So get a narrative in there where you are kind of like the hero of the story. And then last point here, we often see this. Please give us 30 million, but we really want to hear, how you're going to spend the money, and we can't invest 30 million. That's another point. But how you're going to invest money, where will it take you, what will the runway be, who will be the investor after us, and all this. So have the whole plan ready when coming up. Introductions, yeah. Don't shotgun your pitch deck. Don't get all the Danish investors and then just send one common email to everybody, looking for investments. We get these once in a while, and we want to feel special, right? So we also people. We want a little bit of dating going on. If you can, towards introductions, if you can get a warm intro, it's by far the best. So use your network. Get somebody to vouch for you a little bit, to do that introduction. So it just starts at a better place. If you can't get a warm intro to somebody, find them at an event like this. Come say hi to me after, or the other guys at the pre-seed venture booth. But try to get an intro. A cold email, of course, if you have no other options, is the only way forward. I'm just stating that it doesn't work that well, but it can't be the only option, of course. But again, it's a bit like dating. You want to start that interesting stuff going back and forth, right? Cool. So now you have some introductions to some investors, and then going back to what Nicolaj said, it's about creating lines, not dots. So we are not going to invest in you the first time we meet a startup. We're not going to say, here's our money. We really want to build a relationship and see how you actually build your business. How you deliver on the promises you state, and how do you work from whenever you see a defeat or the growth is not as fast as possible. So try to build these relationships and entertain us for a long time, because we really like to see the kind of like the growth of your company a bit and get to know you better. So build that relationship. Yeah, once in a while we see these, and then we're supposed to invest in June, and they state in July is going to be awesome, and that rarely happens. So be realistic with your goals, and then entertain us for a while. Cool. So now you have your intros. You are starting to build relationship with all the investors. Where do you go from there? You want to create momentum to actually get to the end of that funding round, right? So how do you do that? And it's a little bit difficult to nail down. But again, if investors are only people, so and we invest in people. So if you can get some FOMO going, we don't want to miss out on a good deal. If you can somehow hint that there are other players in the game and other people are interested, we will sometimes move a little quicker. And then, but in general, for this last part, don't play too hard, right? So now you got us interested, and we want to work with you guys. But if you end up pushing too hard for something, or even saying something that's not really true in the pitch deck and stuff like this, we have to work afterwards. So once we do an investment, we get a really close working relationship. And if you push too hard in the beginning, it can hurt the relationship on a longer basis. So remember, it's a people's game, and slowly grow that trust, as Nicolaj was talking about us. Cool. Lastly, after you have created the momentum, hopefully you'll get to term sheet stage, and you'll have some offers on people who want to invest in your company. Then the due diligence will typically start, and they will look a bit more closely to your startup. And then in the end, hopefully you'll get to the funding stage. On this last slide, and then I'm done, sorry. Two things to say: keep the momentum all the way to the end. So I've sadly seen people that get to the term sheet stage, and then we have an offer, and then everything kind of slows down, and sometimes it just runs into the sand. So keep the momentum high, and keep all the way to you actually have the money on the account. Otherwise, it can sometimes run out, which is sad. And then the last point to make: it doesn't seem that long, but it takes a lot longer than you think. So please just start earlier than you think, and reserve some time for it, and treat it like a pipeline. Have multiple dialogues going at the same time. Cool. So that was our view on what we look for at an early stage investment, and some tips and do's and don'ts to the process of getting there. That was about it for me,
cool.
Nicolaj.
Okay, so that's the video downloading, so let's just jump into the presentation until that video has been downloaded. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. So my name is John Lieberkind. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Grandhood. So our key message is think pension, just simpler. So what is Grandhood? Well, Grandhood is really our unique synonym for retirement. So think about it this way. You have a childhood, you have adulthood, and now you have a grandhood. So really, we are trying to embrace the third stage of your life as something you actually want to live, something you want to do, and something you want to commemorate. So we're building a seamless pension experience for small business owners and their employees. So I've really been asked here to talk about my fundraising experience, not about Grandhood. So that was the brief intro about Grandhood. So Grandhood has a collaboration with a strong partner bank, which is Saxo Bank. So that is like a good old-fashioned partnership in the sense that it's at arm's length. It's not really a co-branding strategy. It's not really a white labeling strategy. It's a revenue sharing model. So when we make money, they make money. So we take care of the customer experience, the branding, and the asset management, while Saxo Bank delivers bank infrastructure and access to financial markets. So really, this is what I came to talk about. So Grandhood's funding journey looks like this. So I moved back home to Denmark after I've been abroad for 5 years. So I came home from New York in 2016. Started on my own, matured my pitch deck, matured the concept. Then visited Pre-Seed Ventures and Seed Capital in Lyngby in the beginning of December 2016. And I know that these guys just told you that it's about building relationship and building trust, and it is. But I actually have a little funny story here, because when I left, and that was the very first time I met the partner out there, I'm not going to say who it is, but that was the very first meeting, and he was virtually, so this discovery loan, maybe that's something for you. I need to clear it with my colleague who knows a little bit more about fintech than I do, but basically, he said after first meeting that they were willing to grant us a discovery loan, which is a convertible bond. So that came into effect in January. And then the real relationship building started. So being the CEO of a startup, one of the key responsibilities, in my opinion, is really to build investor relations. So I actually made a great deal of building the relationship with Pre-Seed Ventures and the given investment manager on our deal. Kept him in the loop as to our strategy, and he actually played a great role in our pivoting, if you will, of a strategy. So we started out with an idea that we wanted to build a B2C robo-advisor. But together with that investment manager at Pre-Seed Ventures, among others, we quickly find out that unit economics didn't look as appealing. Customer acquisitions were usually higher than expected, and customer lifetime value are lower, that you have higher churn than you have in a B2B pension solutions. So we actually spent around 6 months entertaining that idea before we pivoted. We actually made it as far with that idea that in the summer of 2017 we had an offer at hand from a large Swedish bank that we decided to walk away with. And I want to say that we managed to raise our pre-seed round in September 2017 because of the pivot, not despite of the pivot. So I think that's an interesting takeaway. So having built that relationship, having sort of engaged the investment manager, having him on board as part of the journey, actually enabled us to raise roughly $500,000 in a pre-seed round in September 2017. So with that money, we made some key hires, matured the concept to an extent that we were able to raise some soft funding in May 2018 from InnoBooster. And at that competition, if you will, we raised around $170,000. So that's soft funding, i.e. non-dilutive. So that's obviously a pretty good deal if you're able to land that kind of money. So with that, we again made some key hires, sharpened the idea, and I want to leave you with one takeaway, is that you can't be too narrow and too specific in what you want to build. So we have really, since January 2017, just spending our time narrowing it down, really going from general to specific, general to specific, general to specific, until you nail the hypothesis. And I believe that's what we did when we, in the summer of 2018, managed to raise a fairly large seed round of around $3.2 million. Bearing in mind that we're still not live in the market, we still don't have any customers, we have a lot of signups, but we're not live yet. So that's meaningful. If you aggregate this, that's roughly 25 million Danish kroner pre-launch. So that's meaningful funding. And if I am to touch upon some of the things that we did well, as you guys touch upon, it's about the team really. It's about having the strongest founder team that you can imagine. That is as simply as that. You need to have the strongest founder team for that specific case that you're presenting to your VCs or business angels for that matter. So I made a great deal of an effort to find co-founders that had completely different skill sets than my own. So I have a co-founder who is a lawyer, and I have a co-founder who is a quant who does the algos and does everything numbers, where I do more sort of the commercial role in the company. So find co-founders with different skill set than your own. I think that's an important takeaway. Then it's about finding a market that is enormous, right? If you look at the Danish pension fund market, it's roughly twice the Danish GDP, and the European pension fund market is, I think, around 7 trillion or something, right? So it's just an astronomical market. Make sure that the barriers to entry is super high, super high. Just think about it. How many startups do you know who are actually trying to build a 100% digital pension fund solution? You have some startups that are trying to attack pockets of the market, but to our knowledge, even in Europe, you haven't really seen a player that really want to challenge the incumbents on the way that you distribute pension saving solutions to small businesses and the employees. So that's really what we're trying to do. So the takeaway here, find an astronomical market, high barriers to entry. And I want to dwell a little bit upon the high barriers to entry, because what does that even mean, right? So high barriers to entry, in my opinion, is the pension fund market is actually a good poster child for that, because it's deadly boring to most people. So already there, you've filled it out, a lot of eager guys and gals that there's just not so many people that are interested in pensions, right? It's pretty dry for most people, so you already weeded out a few people there. But then you actually need, in my opinion, and that's just my opinion, you actually need some kind of industry expertise. So me and my two co-founders, we all have a background from investment banking, but from various pockets of the market. So I used to be a chief investment strategist with Merrill Lynch in Wall Street in New York. And my other co-founder, he used to be a short-term euro swap trader with Danske Markets. And my third co-founder used to be a chief legal advisor with Danske Markets. So find co-founders that actually have a high knowledge of the industry that you're trying to disrupt, if it's fintech, in my opinion. Then it's all about hiring the right people. I wanna pause myself because it's already been a lot about what we have done well. One thing I would have done different is to find a classical technical co-founder, so a classical CTO type. So I don't have that in my founder team. I have an algo guy, but I don't have a classical CTO. If I could have done it backwards or done it again, I would make sure to find a classic CTO from the get-go. Because you learn the hard way how difficult they are to come about. So with that, I would jump to hiring, because once you secured the money, well, the jury is out, right? That's really when the pressure starts. Everything is such a congratulatory win that you fundraise, right? Obviously, the means to an end, but that's when the pressure really starts to hit, right? And one of the things that your VCs want to see you execute on is attracting top talent, right? Otherwise, you're not going to build a killer solution. So being able to attract top talent actually ties into what I started with, right? Find top-tier co-founders. Because if you are to attract top talent, you need a top-notch co-founding team, right? Because how are you going to attract a guy with a 10-year track record from the Danish pension fund industry if he doesn't respect the founder team? That's going to be very difficult, right? How are you going to attract one of the best UI UX product designers from France, have him relocate from Paris if you don't have a top-notch product manager? How are you going to attract one of the best mobile developer out there, have her relocate her and her family from Singapore to Denmark if she doesn't believe that you have the best talent and the strongest founder team and the strongest vision? You're just not, right? So again, it all ties back to the founder team. The founder team is going to be sort of the generator for hiring T-talent. One thing is hiring top talent. Another thing is keeping them. And that's something I learned maybe the hard way, because I come from investment banking, and that's really just one way. Either you pay them or you fire them, right? That's really that's sort of the two strings you have in investment banking. It's up or out. It's a bit more nuanced in startup. So I think that actually requires a lot from the founders, especially if you're a first-time founder. And actually, my entire founder team, we're all first-time founders, and we all come from banking. We all come from a culture where you work hard and you keep your head down and you wait to payday. That's not how it works in a startup. So that's something you have to learn and sort of work you through into, and we're still learning as we go. But the key takeaway I want to leave with that is that know what motivates different people, right? A CTO is motivated by one thing, a product manager is motivated by another thing, and a lead front-end developer might be motivated by an entirely third thing. So quickly identify what your employees and your key hires are motivated by and try to implement it as soon as possible, which leads me to a final point, which I think is extremely important, and I think most startups fail to do, at least we did in some kind of way, is to think about HR in a startup very early on. You think that being in a startup, I mean, everyone are buddies and it's 100K power. It is, but you still need HR. You still need to understand that you're working with people. They have different incentives. You need to do the walk-in talks. You need to do the quarterly reviews. You need to build an incentive structure. And I think most, at least first-time founders, fail to realize that HR in a startup is super important. I'm going to leave you with that, and hopefully the video is able to play. It's a 20-second video, so it's going to be...
cool, and then you're hip to... Yeah, we get Skido up after that. Yeah, and so then after this video, we're going to put up the Skido... Slido. You guys, a quick note, if you're starting something, have an unusual name. Don't name it after everything else out there. All right, cool. After this video, we'll put Slido up there with the questions.
Can you turn up the sound?
And then, Nicolaj, if you'll moderate that, yeah? Cool.
That's granted.
You got the questions.
Yeah.
All right. You can take them in the
Should I
order
guess?
you want them.
Should I guess the questions or? Are they
Well, no, I mean, you're reading them in front of you. I mean,
they
which
already.
ones
Oh,
are-
I'm just fucking.
yeah, the ones behind, the ones that you're looking at, they're on the screen in front of them. So whichever one you want to answer first, Nicolaj, you pick, and then have the other guys answer with you.
It's really hard to.
Can you read it? Do we need bigger resolution?
So we take the first one about basically on, how to raise money. So basically, I think there's basically two questions. The first one is it better to bootstrap? That means no funding initially, then take early stage funding. And the part question there, if you take early stage funding, is it better taking convertible note than a loan, or than equity? I can start just very briefly and say that I never met a startup that say, gosh, I should have taken money in earlier, in perfect hindsight. It doesn't exist. But I meet a lot of founders who say, if we have waited 6 months, then maybe we could have taken it ourselves, and maybe we'd had less dilution so we can raise more money later on when the value goes up. So I think that's my short I think the convertible note versus equity is really a long answer, but I think that's me on bootstrapping. What do you think, Alexander?
Yeah, so I fully agree. Now there.
Fuck.
Okay, cool. Yeah, no, I agree. There's a certain stage where it makes sense to take in money, and it shouldn't be too early. Also, because you're not gonna get to the next value inflection point where your company kind of grows in value for the next investor to come in. So of course it makes sense. And then I'm an investor, so I really urge you to take in.
You got a point where you're saying yes or no to these companies.
Oh.
You said yes or no to a whole bunch of companies. So can you give us a couple of examples? Feel free to anonymize them, and if you're thinking of an example next to them, can you give us some specifics? Get some nice, juicy, some examples of things that have made you say yes on KPIs.
On the KPIs?
Yeah, on the KPIs.
Oh, yeah, okay. Growth like this, growing straight up, is also really nice. The best Danish guy from Google, for example, combined with a super business guy, kind of like a founder team that is incredible. Is that what you're looking for next? Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, have you got like an example? Have you? Nicolaj mentioned them. Have you actually invested in a team where you weren't crazy about the product, but you loved the team?
Oh yeah, it happens quite often actually. People pivot like Jon did with their startup, right? So you start up with an idea, and we get on, and we get we get that flirting going, and we really believe in the team and kind of like the end vision. But there are always multiple ways to get there, and sometimes the end vision kind of changes along the road. So yeah, a lot of times where we actually invest, and it turns out to be something completely different. So from a robo-advisor to a pension fund, right?
Cool with you guys. What did it feel like on the other side?
What's that?
Raising money, and when did you feel like you set the hook? When they said, yeah, or for you with this question about the raising money or taking a note, did it fit exactly with your timeline? Did you have to run longer than you thought, or?
So this is the way I want to put this answer. This is not exact science, right? And I don't think that's a right or wrong.
But how did it work for you? If we just to give the audience an example.
So the short answer, I wouldn't have done it different. The only thing I would have done different is if I had the money to self-fund myself. Up until now, I might have done it, but as you know, we raised quite a lot. Having said that, I actually think we got a lot of good sparring out of our VCs. So I'm actually in the camp that I've been very happy with raising VC money, and it's been a good sparring partner.
So a lot of the no's made you smarter.
Yeah, I think our VCs had made us smarter and sharper. Yes.
Yeah. Should we take one the other?
Yeah.
Okay. So we take the number 4. So where do we find team members? Well, if I should start there, I think actually you're sitting in the right place.
Yeah.
So honestly, it's about talking about your idea to as many people as possible, whether that are your classmates or a startup competition or here or Pre-Seed Academy. That's what I would do, because none of us started with a great network, right? We have a great network because we have talked to a lot of people.
Yeah, so I fully agree. It's all about getting yourself out there, attend events, start looking for the right profiles, on LinkedIn, and within your network, ask who knows somebody that might be the relevant guy. And again, coffee with a stranger is a good way to start. Do you agree?
Yeah. And if I could just take one recent example, I met a potential co-founder of a startup go into, and we need a technical co-founder, because exactly for the same reasons.
Yeah.
So we basically said, okay, let's take our entire idea and put it online and see if we can find the person. What's really to steal.
Yeah.
So again, going out there online and offline and getting as much input as you can.
Where did you meet your team?
What's that?
Sorry, where did you meet your team?
So how we hired OK Talent?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's your story?
Yeah. So I think one of the greater stories to highlight is that we actually managed to relocate a mobile front-end developer from Singapore with her entire family, and we needed someone to code in React Native, and we posted the job ad in a React Native form, and we were successful in that.
Yeah. What about your co-founders? Did you know each other before?
So one of my co-founders I've known since I was 14 years old, and the other co-founder I studied with on my bachelor's, and then he branched out in the more quantity route. So,
cool. Should we take this about standard deals? So what's the question is basically you get an offer, that AKA a term sheet or an email from an investor. That could be a business angel or pre-seed saying you can get this much money for X%, and all the terms. I would say evaluating a startup is really different, because it depends on what kind of startup it is. It depends on location. Startups in US is priced higher, but what does it matter when you're in Copenhagen? So I think my advice would be go out to talk to your peers. If you know Jon, then of course it's all confidential, but we all talk about it anyways, right? So we say, so what do you think about this valuation? I think that what I would do, because there's no magic formula. It's about seeing out there. And of course, if you have more than one offer, that's great for you. But in many cases, you get an offer here, and then you get an offer in 4 or 5 months. So should you wait? And I would let that decision based upon basically what you hear in the market and what your peers are saying. How about Jon?
yeah, I actually have an interesting angle on this, that it sounds like a cliche, but I really don't think it is. You can actually get a too high valuation too early on, especially if it's a strategic investor or corporate investor. If you are a fintech and one of your first investors are a bank, at least that was what we experienced, that you can actually get a super high pre-money valuation from a bank if they believe in the case and the case have strategic value. But what you run the risk of is that you end up becoming an acqui-hire. So all of a sudden you're spun into their strategic framework that has nothing to do with your vision.
Exactly. And what's the specific problem with it? If your valuation is too high on your first round, what does that do to you later on?
Well, worst case, you have to do a down round. And,
exactly. So it makes it really difficult to raise later on.
And often you would see a strategic investor or corporate investor having an interest in ring fencing you, so they will give you a way too high pre-money value, because then they know you're dead in the water for most VCs or business angels in particular. And then you're going to have a tough time breaking out of that, and then you're an acqui-hire.
Right, that ring fence was a really trap is another word for that. Yeah,
it's a value trap.
So should we take the traction? So what does traction mean for you for software as a service?
Yeah, because you go like this. What is this with the hockey stick?
What would you want to see early on?
Yeah, so it all depends.
Oh,
no. Early traction. So user love is the most important part, right? So that you actually have users using your product. So for Vivino, the first product wasn't that great, but people kept coming back because it's the only place that you could act digitally within the wine industry, right? So then that is the most important. So traction actually comes after user love. But towards traction, so at a Series A, you say 100K for MRR, typical for a SaaS company, right? That's the rule of thumb. We don't have that kind of like narrow band.
Well, I can add in a little bit on the angel, because normally the most rounds are basically like either like a public investor like you, or basically a business thing like me. And when I go into a software as a service startup, most often there's a little bit of revenue or a little bit of users, right? I'm mostly into B2B, so for me traction is mostly have you sent a few invoices, right? I think if you're in business to consumer, none of us are paying for our apps, so most likely the traction there is most likely in terms of users and retention.
Yeah.
But for me, I would like that they have sent a few invoices and it seems that the customers are sticking on. It might be recurring revenue of only 2,000 krona a month, something like that, right? Because then I say, okay, there's at least a few customers that are paying their bills, and maybe you can even go out and talk with them and hear what they say.
Yeah, and then that you can indicate that you can do it again, kind of like the thing,
exactly.
right? So the early traction, and you can scale it up.
So there are different levels, right? Where if you go to a real VC later on, we normally would talk about at least 1 million euro in recurring revenue a year.
Yeah, too. Yeah.
So, John, do you have time for one more? Or
Tell you what, if I could just do this really quick, John needs to be interviewed. So if you stand up and everybody applauds, you can leave and those guys can talk for another 2 minutes.
Cool.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cool. We also need your microphone. You guys keep talking because it's going to get a time.
Thank you.
To take the next one on what participating in pitch competitions and accelerators mean?
Yeah.
I think it means, for me, two different things. Well, you won this pitch competition somewhere, it doesn't really matter. Don't give that much credibility, sorry to say. I think what it gives you is visibility. So it's opportunity that you meet this co-founder or employee or business angel or whatever. And it could also mean that you actually get some confidence. And of course, if it involves a little bit of money early on, 20,000 or 50,000 krona actually matters in the early days. That actually means you can hire this student employee. So I think, again, if it's about getting out there and getting visibility, I would do it. Of course, as you get more mature, winning 20,000 krona doesn't matter that much to you. So that's at least what I don't know how you see.
No, I completely agree. So pitch competition, winning them doesn't matter too much. It's the network, which is super nice. Of course, it gives you confidence. Accelerators, we really like accelerators. Somebody else helping you with developing your business, and they do some very good accelerator programs out there. I'm working with one startup called Omnio, and they are almost professional accelerator participants because they work in a B2B field with huge corporates, and they all have their accelerator programs. And it's just a really nice way to get in the door at a huge corporate because you are inside once you are part of the accelerator. Mentor programs, of course, if you can, the more cool people you can add around your startup makes a lot of sense. Small grants, as much as possible, go for it. Free money is awesome money. And we encourage all our startups, also after we invest, to try to receive as many grants as possible.
With the grants, there's also people you can pay to apply for the grants. And there's some fields that it really makes sense. I'm thinking Labster. Didn't they reach like 20 million worth of grants before? This is a company that raised 20 million kroner in free money in grants. But paying people to, how about this angle on? I see more and more companies and more consultants that'll do the grant work for you in return for a fee.
I think the one thing you have to have in mind getting a grant is that grant, aka public soft money here, that is, the government has to be very objective in giving money. Getting money from a business angel or investor like Pre-Seed is about building relations and drinking some beers and feel that we're on this journey together. When you get a grant, most often you have to send in an application. Actually, I'm in the startup, we have to send in an application on Thursday. And this is where the decision is mostly based on this application. So it's not based on your personality or whatever, it's based on this application where you write everything down. And if you're not good at this, you either have to become good at this, you can learn it, it's not rocket science, or you have to get someone on the team or hire someone that can. Because I see a lot of, in one of my startups, we got 2.3 million euro in soft funding from EU. And we were lucky that we had the skills in-house to write the application because we've basically done it before. And I'll just say that these grants, also the small ones, like the Inner Booster, like the Fund for Entrepreneurship or whatever, they matter so much. And it's just the stupid thing if you don't apply for those. And I'll say EU ones are very tough to write on your own because it's like 200 pages. And Inner Booster is 4 pages, it's manageable and you can learn it.
But it's also smaller amounts of money. Booster, 4 pages, 400,000.
Yeah, but I would say for an
EU.
early stage, 500,000 for an early stage Inner Booster, they actually go up to 5 million kroner.
Cool.
So,
quick note, something. Have you guys seen the EU is often more and more asking for a pitch to go along with the deck?
But that's only in the finals. That's after you have
gotta be selected,
reached the 13.5 out of 15. So, that's something that comes later.
We have time for another question because they're still miking up.
So I guess that's for you, Alexander. Do you?
Yeah.
Oh, it changed.
No, but we
You
can do it
invest
really
in
quickly.
the Nordic.
Yeah, no, we only invest in Denmark as of now.
Only in Denmark.
Yeah.
But Denmark used to own the entire Nordics, so that matters. MVP for hardware. How many of you are involved in hardware startups? Hardware is hard, right? It's costly. So I would say you have a harder time raising early stage funding because it's just really, really hard to do this iteration. I'm sometimes involved in some of those, and you really have to be smart in doing stuff really, really cheap. So what was the question? Do we do it? I have invested in hardware startups, yes. You have also?
Yeah, plenty of times.
But I guess
we really like if there's a kind of like software layer to the hardware as well. It just becomes a bit more sticky, and you get to interact with the users on an ongoing basis. And it's easier to get that defensible barrier or moat in the long run. Yeah.
We'll end on that note. Just a quick, you guys meet a lot of hardware startups and you also meet software startups. I was hearing a couple of smart people on a podcast this morning saying that all software people think that hardware startups are easy and all hardware people think that software startups is just software, it's just code. Yeah, you do see that? All right. Listen, I'd like a big hand. Thank you very much, gents.
Thank you.